Nice.
Okay, we are recording. Sitting opposite me today via the means of Zoom, Chris Shiflett. Hello.
How you doing?
I'm all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's a little cold. It feels a little, British here in California today. It's a little overcast.
Well, we've got snow today. This is the first bit of snow that we've had in. I'm just outside London, and we've got snow today. So we've been locked down, and I guess we'll get onto that shortly. But we've been locked down for probably the same amount of time as you guys. So snow has been this kind of like really nice kind of change of scenery and just an opportunity to go out with the kids and play in the snow.
Yeah, nice. I mean, yeah, that's kind of like, one of the big challenges of this whole thing is, especially on the family front, or, entirely on the family front, is like keeping our kids active and getting them outside and, all that sort of thing.
How have you found like the last sort of 10, 11 months, personally, and how have you found it professionally as well, like creatively?
Well, professionally, I mean, it's been obviously very strange and frustrating to have made a record that then has to just sit there for months and months before we could put it out. That's not the way, obviously, that's not the way that we normally do things. Normally we finish a record and go right into rehearsing and we're on the road before it comes out, but it usually comes out pretty quick. So that's been really strange. Creatively, it's given me all this time at home to tinker around and, mess around with guitar stuff and write a bunch of songs and all that sort of thing. And it's been, to be perfectly frank, it's been wonderful to be home for a nice long stretch with my wife and kids. That's been great. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like putting this record out has been obviously unique, but our team, the team that's sort of around the Foo Fighters, has done a pretty amazing job of getting attention on it without having the thing that rock bands really depend on, which is hitting the road. That's the most important thing for a band like Foo Fighters.
Well, let's talk records, and for track one, Chris, I'm going to ask you the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro, please.
This one was a tough one, man. Because,
everyone says that, man. Everyone says this is a tough one.
I'll tell you why. I thought it was a tough one. It was a tough one to me. Where the hell is that? My list. First, let me find my list of songs. It was a tough one to me because of course, my first thought was like I needed to find some like prog rock song that had some crazy, that just did some wild stuff. And then there's things like, some Guitar Hero stuff where, I think of like the Yngwie Malmsteen sort of whole guitar solo intro to the Steelers song Hot on Your Heels. I mean, I could have very well thrown that out there, but I went with something kind of brief and simple, which is the Clash with their song Radio Clash, because that intro to it, it's such a declaration, it's like bum 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 bum, and then Joe Strummer laughing, you know what I mean? It's like it's iconic.
And it's a really psychotic laugh as well, isn't it? It just
totally.
It don't mess with you. That's great. That is. I just kind of like to ask musicians this question regarding intros as well. And in the time that you've been making music, when you first started putting records out, the way that people will be listening to those records would be very different to how they're listening to music now. Pre-streaming and stuff like that. And so, in looking at the photos and looking at what you're doing now, and the audience, I think, speaking from my perspective, goes way beyond just your standard rock and roll fans. Like it's a huge, phenomenon there. And I just wonder that when you look at how young people and their listening habits seem to be getting, and their attention span seems to be getting shorter and shorter, like, and hearing that, like, to get on the radio now, certain songs, the vocal has to be in by this amount of time, and all of that kind of stuff. And the fact that your first go-to when I asked you about intros was like prog and something very, very grand and long.
Yeah.
Like the way that you would make music then to how you make music now, have the changes in how people ingest it, has that affected your process of writing? Do you know where I'm going with that question? It was a bit long-winded.
Yeah, well, I mean, no, I get it. I mean, if you look at the new Foo Fighter album, it's only got 9 songs, which is kind of brief, historically for us. And the songs, I feel like this time around, and this I don't think was a conscious effort, but the songs are a little more concise this time around. It's a shorter record, less songs, but even the songs themselves are a little shorter. I mean, I don't know. We're all sort of affected by losing our attention spans. We like to say it's just those kids nowadays, but like we're just as guilty of that
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Everybody is. But yeah, it's funny. There was a point a few years ago. I mean, it was quite a few years ago now, where we made a Foo Fighter documentary, and part of that process was I went back and reached out to a bunch of people that I'd grown up playing music with, and got like all this video footage of our bands in high school and stuff. And I was really struck by this is something I just kind of forgot about that era. And this was like the '80s, when we were teenagers and going to lots of rock and roll shows and stuff. And everybody, it seemed like all the bands that we were seeing, they would have like intro music to the set, where they would come out and they would do some instrumental thing, and it would go on for a few minutes, and the guitar players would take guitar solos, and the singer might come out and go woo, or what. And our high school band kind of incorporated that into like almost everything like every song had an intro that was like a different song than the song itself, basically. Yeah, I think that's kind of gone the way of the dodo.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, I mean, just to touch on the Clash as well, before we go on to your second track, was the punk scene something that was pretty important to you growing up?
Eventually, yeah. I mean, I grew up listening to, my brother's records. I had 2 older brothers, and like when we were kids in the '70s, it was like classic rock. I'm old enough to remember when punk rock became a thing, and the sort of like aura around it. And we weren't like punk rock kids at all. Like we, at least it was probably different where you were, but like in California, being a little kid at that time, in Santa Barbara, like punk rock was like this scary thing where people are like killing each other at the shows, and all this crazy, all this stuff. So it seemed really scary. I mean, I remember I have a pretty clear memory of the first time I saw a punk rocker walking down the street, and my reaction was like, oh fuck, that's scary. And I think the guy just had like a buzz cut and like a plaid shirt or something. It wasn't like he wasn't like mohawks and this whole thing, It's like before all that. So for me, like I got turned onto punk rock really like junior high school was when I first started getting turned on to it. And it wasn't my first choice musically, but I grew up in a small enough town that it was kind of the only choice like to go to like see a band live at a party. It was going to be a speed metal, thrash metal band, or it was going to be a punk rock band. It was not going to be, Hanoi Rocks or something that I would have preferred. Hold on one sec. My dog is like
no worries,
scratching at the back door here to get out. So I kind of got turned on started getting turned on punk rock then, but it was all like stuff that, I was like, this was like the mid '80s, and I was listening to stuff from the late '70s. It's like it took me that long to get turned on to the Clash and Stiff Little Fingers and The Damned and stuff like that. You know what I mean? But music around that time, from the mid '80s into the early '90s, music changed a lot. My taste changed a lot. Like, just things have a way of shifting, and eventually I found myself playing guitar and No Use for a Name and being like pretty immersed in that world, that scene at that time, which I loved. That was my favorite stuff kind of going on in those years, NoFX and Bad Religion and all the related bands. I just loved it.
Well, we'll pick up on that kind of part of your journey in a little bit, but I just want to sort of stay in the formative years for this next track, please, Chris. And the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you, please.
Well, for that you have to go back quite a bit. I mean, this would have been like the mid '70s, and there was 2 of them, and they both had the same effect on me. And one was "Isn't She Lovely" by Stevie Wonder. My dad was a huge Stevie Wonder fan, so he would always be cranking Stevie Wonder, and every time that song would come on, Maybe it was because it starts with a baby crying. I don't know why. There's just
Yeah,
something about that song. It would make me cry every time. And the other one that had basically the exact same effect on me was the Glenn Campbell version of Southern Nights that was like a huge hit in the
yeah.
70s. And I don't know why that song did it. There's nothing really about it that's particularly, heartbreaking or sad. I don't even know lyrically if I don't even know if it's like a romantic song at all, but or whatever. But there's something about the pull of the sounds of those songs just like did it to me.
So you mentioned that your dad had be playing like Stevie Wonder and stuff. Was there always records on at home growing up?
Oh, but yeah, always. My dad was a huge music fan, and I didn't realize it at the time, but because we were into rock and roll, so we hated the music that he listened to. But he was
Yeah,
listening to like it was like a nonstop flow of Bob Marley and Stevie Wonder, which is
nice.
great. Eventually I realized that he actually was listening to the better music in the house. I mean, I liked my brother's records too. My brother's records was Elvis and the Beatles and the Stones, and then as the '70s moved along, it maybe got a little more aggressive with Black Sabbath and Aerosmith and things like that. But I kind of it's funny talking about this stuff because I have a theory that certain like some people, and I consider myself one of them, have a uh, um, like a deeper like physical reaction to music than others. I think there's a lot of people in this world that um, are casual with their listening choices,
Yeah.
and I'm not casual, and I never have been, and my brothers weren't casual, and they never have been, and I just think there's some people in this world, and I don't mean that like as like look at me, I'm so great, and
No,
I don't mean
I
it like that at
totally
all.
get you.
Yeah, I just think it has like music has always had a physical impact on me and still does.
Do you get goosebumps?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because like not all people get goosebumps. I only found that out like a little while ago that only certain people get goosebumps, and I just think, man, if you've never had like goosebumps from a record, like what a feeling
Yeah.
to be missing out on.
I know, right? I mean it's why you listen to certain music when you're miserable, and it's why you listen to certain music when you're over the moon, it supercharges whatever emotion you're feeling at that time.
So if you're having a low day and you're feeling a bit blue, do you do you sort of indulge that emotion and do you listen to something somber, or do you go and put on some
Oh
kind of
yeah.
you like to kind of sort of process it and indulge it?
Totally wallow in it. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm totally the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we touched on school briefly there. So for track three, I'm going to ask you, please, Chris, the song that reminds you of your time at school.
Well, which era? What are we referring to my school days? Because that would be there'd be a range there. If it was like real young, it'd probably be something by Kiss. Because like when I was real young, that was like my favorite band was Kiss.
Okay.
Um, um, and you could probably go with like Strutter by
Nice.
Kiss would be a good one. But if you get into high school, you might get into like you know, maybe like a Guns N' Roses track or something. I mean, Guns N' Roses, like when that whole thing, my group of friends, like I said, I mean, you're sort of exposed in high school to a lot of like punk rock and thrash metal and things like that. But I had this core group of friends, and we were like glam rockers, and that was like our thing. So and we would go see like Poison and Jet Boy and Faster Pussycat and Guns N' Roses and all those bands like when they were club bands and before they had record deals and all that stuff. So that was like our little secret scene that seemed kind of underground and cool. And then there was a point, and like we would try to dress like those bands and stuff, and people would make fun of us at school or whatever. There's that whole sort of thing because like that wasn't really very mainstream or mainstream at all, like where I grew up. And then there was this incredible turning point in the around like 1986, 87. Or I guess it was like, or maybe a little bit later, 87, 88, whatever. When all of a sudden those bands, especially Poison and Guns N' Roses, became like the biggest bands in the world. And then all of a sudden this weird little boutique scene that me and my friends had been into all these years suddenly became very mainstream and like maybe a little more like acceptable uh socially. And that was a strange. So if you want to pick like one song, maybe it's like Night Train by Guns N' Roses would be a good
Nice.
one.
Did
Yeah.
you did you enjoy school, Chris?
Fuck no. I was a terrible student. I mean, I didn't have a particularly bad experience or anything. Like, I can't complain. It was like I've dropped out of high school and hadn't done much since about junior high, and it was like straight F's, for a lot of that time. And I blame nobody but myself. I was a uninspired, somewhat lazy kid, and that's kind of much to my own children's chagrin, because that's like my mission in life, to not ever allow them to go down that same road. But no, I was a terrible student, and I went to, like, the schools I went to were fine. They weren't bad schools. I didn't have bad teachers. It wasn't a case of like being oppressed by the man or what. It was just like I was just not focused.
Was you a creative kid?
Um, Not, I mean, I don't know. Not really. I kind of came to songwriting really even late. Like, I always loved playing guitar. I guess that's creative in a sense. And I always doinked around with little ideas and stuff, but I really didn't like really start trying to write my own songs until like well into my late 20s, early 30s. So I don't know. I don't know that I would describe myself as the most creative kid. I just loved rock and roll, and I loved being in a band, and I loved being around it and playing gigs, and I just loved all that part of it. But it was maybe a little bit later that the sort of artistic side of it hit home with me.
Did you know what you wanted to be?
hmm From a very, very young age, which I recognize now was a, a good thing. That's a real plus in your life, whatever it is you want to do, to know from a young age, and to really, like, I had there was no guesswork. I didn't know what, I knew I wanted to be a, whatever, a professional musician or whatever, be in a band. Obviously, when you're 13 years old and you make that decision, you don't have the slightest idea what that really means,
Yeah.
or how to get there, or what it would be like when you're there. And, but yeah, no, that's what I wanted.
Was you a confident kid?
I think in some ways I was kind of annoyingly, like, I was a mix of totally insecure and gullible and naive, and totally like egomaniacal at the same time in some ways. Like I said, like, me and my friends used to go to LA a lot, and we would go see shows, and we were sort of into music that was a little outside of the mainstream. And growing up in Santa Barbara, I had this kind of chip on my shoulder that I can recognize now, of like, all these people around me, they don't know what's up, and I know what's up, and I'm going to go do this thing when I get out of here, when I get out of this little hick town, man. And, that kind of attitude, which I think is just kind of funny now to look back at.
I mean, in regards to sort of, you know, I think one of the questions that I like to ask alongside confidence is, I mean, you chose a career in an industry that is, very, very difficult to succeed in, and you've reached, incredible levels of success. Like, are you driven?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe more, and maybe in a more organized way at age, almost 50,
Yeah.
than I was when I was 18. And if you look, like, if I think about on like my path through through bands and through the music industry, like, I moved to LA when I was 18 in 1990, just in time for the LA music scene to completely have imploded and basically gone away. And that was during that shift when things were going from like rock music to like alt rock music, and
Yeah.
grunge and everything was sort of bubbling up, and punk rock was on its way to becoming mainstream and all that sort of stuff. So there was this big sort of, music shift, cultural shift happening, that was interesting, and really, like, I didn't get in a band that toured and made records until I was almost 24. I was like 23 still, but just barely. This was in 95 when I joined No Use for a Name. And I honestly, and this is like a kind of a recurring theme, I feel like, when I look back at things, I honestly felt like I'd missed the boat. I was late on the freight. All my friends were in these bands going off on tour and making records and getting record deals. And whether that was within a punk rock indie label or a major label, whatever. All that stuff seemed to be happening for everybody all around me and not for me. And then I joined No Use for a Name and started making records and did that, for whatever, 4.5 years. And then I was really at the point, for various reasons, of beginning to see the end of that for me, not necessarily for No Use for a Name, but for me, where there were some internal issues around that band, that I was kind of at that point where I was beginning to feel like, maybe I've had my run with this whole thing and maybe it's time to think about the next thing.
Oh,
I
really?
had yeah, I in the spring of 99, I think it was, we were working on a new No Use for a Name album. And for the first time ever, like I said, I dropped out of high school and never went to college. And then I signed up just kind of on a lark. I was living in San Francisco and I went to, took like a full load of classes at San Francisco City College that were just like, base level, English 101 or what, just some stuff like that. And I really enjoyed it. And did that for a whole semester. And that was it was, I don't know, looking back, what I would have done. I don't know if I would have stuck with No Use for a Name for another 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, whatever, or quit the next week. I don't know. It's hard to know because my life suddenly diverged. That summer I got the gig playing with the Foo Fighters, but those thoughts were creeping into my head of I was like 28 at that point. I wasn't a kid anymore. I was a grown ass man, out there in the world. And so that was kind of that was an interesting year for me, obviously. I wound up getting this gig in this band that was like my favorite band of the moment and loved the Foo Fighters. And then, things I think in some ways, I think it's a good thing that didn't happen for me until I was 28. And I also didn't step into I didn't join the Foo Fighters and have my life radically alter.
Yeah.
Because it's not like when you do that, especially considering where the band was at that point, which was a much smaller level of success, even though it was, successful and mainstream and hit songs and all that stuff. It was much smaller than it is now. So it wasn't like I all of a sudden, had a mansion and a Lamborghini and a fucking couple of tigers and, went off the rails completely. And I was a little more, I'm not going to pretend that I was some shining, responsible human at that point. I wasn't, but it was probably a good thing that didn't happen to me when I was 18. I'll just put it that way.
You got the tigers now, though, right?
Oh, I just let it out the back door. You didn't notice that? I called it my dog, but really that's Scruffy the tiger.
Well, I'm always interested when I speak to musicians as well about, the idea of imposter syndrome. And I've seen your band many times and I've watched multiple, Foos performances where there's fucking thousands and thousands of people there. And I've seen, just watching some stuff today prepping for this, seeing you on Saturday Night Live with like Mick Jagger and stuff. And it's like,
oh yeah.
Do you ever kind of stand there and just think, fuck, what am I doing? Like, how am I here? I know, and that's not taking anything away from your, achievements, but just that kind of imposter syndrome. Do you ever get that? Just thinking, how am I here? This is nuts.
I don't know if like I said, it's been such a kind of slow journey through the years, that it's built. So you don't spend that much time reflecting on things in that way. But I'll tell you, because last year was the 25th anniversary of the band, and we were supposed to do this 25th anniversary tour. And so because that couldn't happen, we did this like slideshow. I don't know if you saw that thing. We did this slideshow where we all sat there and just looked through like a million pictures of over the years. And that was definitely one of those moments where you, not so much like in terms of like imposter syndrome or whatever, but in terms of like, fuck, we have covered an insane amount of ground, and look how old we are now. Jesus, we were so young, when the whole thing started out. But it's wild, man, when you think about it. I mean, you mentioned the Mick Jagger thing. That was like, that it just doesn't get. The only thing that could top that for me personally would be to do the same thing with Keith Richards, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Track 4. First song you remember buying from a record store, please, Chris.
Well, the first album I ever bought with my own money. And I spent many years just listening to my brother's records, and didn't have to buy my own records, and kind of didn't have my own taste in music. And that, I feel like, I started to develop my own specific opinions about what was what, maybe around the time that I bought my first record, which was uh, uh, Double Platinum by Kiss, which could go back, I think the opening track, if I remember that right, is the remake of Strutter, called Strutter 78, which you could go right back to my answer from a few questions ago of Strutter.
So, from then and then to, as you got older, how important did like record stores become for you?
Oh, so important. I mean, there were at that time, in the whatever that was, the late 70s through the 80s, there were record stores all over town. There was one in downtown Santa Barbara called Sound Factory that I used to go to all the time, and knew the guys that worked in the behind the counter, and they were, that's how you wound up buying all kinds of stuff, because they would go, oh, you're into that, check this out, you got to check this thing out. So there was a lot of that. Or like I remember going to like that Japanese band Loudness played in town and did like a signing at Sound Factory, and I still have my copy of that record that I took down there and had them sign it, and
Nice.
Stuff like that. But also like rooting, or when I got a little older, like there were some really good record stores out in Goleta and out in Isla Vista, and Isla Vista was the part of town where there's like a big college, so you had like all the record stores that kind of catered to that and were a little more off the beaten path, and we would just go out there and root around in those bins and look, just find little gems. And you didn't, especially if you were into any kind of whatever form of like underground music you were into in those days, you had to do a lot of searching. And you didn't, if you got into a band, you didn't know if that was like the only record they had, or maybe they had 10 records, and it would take like years to figure out a band's whole catalog. Or at least it did for me where I lived. And so that was a big part of the thing. You'd be looking through like, what the fuck is this New York Dolls record? And because of that, being a dumb kid, I bought like a lot of boombox bootlegs that were totally useless. Still have many of those in my record collection.
Do you think that there's, I don't want to kind of, I'm 47, so I'm kind of mindful that I don't want to kind of sort of sound like an old guy. But
hey, before you finish that question, I thought I might introduce to you my tiger.
Oh, that is a very pretty tiger.
This guy, huh? Look at this guy.
Nice.
There you go. Anyway.
Yeah, so at 47, I don't want to sound like the old guy, but what you just said there about it can take years to kind of find out about bands and their back catalogue, because we didn't have the internet then.
Yeah.
And do you think there's something that's been lost in how technology has advanced? There's something been lost in the journey that was, and just the passion that what you did get, you would hold and study the sleeve notes and the artwork. And do you think there's something lost there?
I think there's a huge thing lost there. And I've talked about this before, where I think that because you would wind up, I don't know how often I would actually buy a new album in those days. Maybe I'd get a new album every couple of months or something. And even if you thought it sucked, you still wound up listening to it over and over for that very reason, because it was because you fucking went and spent $10 on it or whatever, and you were going to listen to it anyway, so you just got to know it. I think that whole part of it is gone, and my kids don't have that experience at all. It's like too much available at their fingertips. But then that is, that's obviously the upside of this whole thing too, is I think you lose something and you gain something. The thing that you gained might outweigh the thing that you lose, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I could exactly measure the way that turned me into a music fan and a passionate music fan. I think it helped, because there was that, like, it always means a little more when you have to make an effort to do something, whatever it is. So I don't know, but I do like, that nowadays I hear some old honky tonk singer and I just go, whoop, whoop, and find it on
Yeah,
Spotify. And I love that part of technology too. So
yeah,
there's good,
yeah, yeah.
bad.
It's absolutely, absolutely. Um, for track 6, oh no, track 5, I'm going to ask you about the song that soundtrack your year's clubbing.
Yeah. I mean, if I think clubbing is maybe, well, I mean, people go clubbing here, of course, too. I was going to say that's maybe more of an English distinction, but that would be silly because obviously there's plenty of clubs here. But when I was younger and going clubbing, like my version of that would be going to keg parties or something
Yeah,
as a kid growing up. So uh, in Santa Barbara, where I grew up, like the soundtrack to keg parties will always seem to be Metallica.
yeah,
And nothing against Metallica, like because obviously legendary band, but they weren't. That wasn't really my musical scene. But I know that all those records from the '80s, like front to back, because you just heard them all the time,
yeah.
everywhere you went, in everybody's car, and at every keg party. It was always Metallica. So yeah, I'd go
So,
with that. I picked Ride the Lightning just because I always liked that one.
so was there rock clubs though?
Well, I mean, there were in Santa Barbara. There was like a place that my band used to play a lot actually in those days called Club Iguana, and then there was another club across the street that we played a lot called Carnival. So there certainly was, but when I think of clubbing, I think of like Studio 54 or something like
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
or what's the one in the famous one in what's it, the Hacienda.
yeah. Manchester, yeah,
Right. You know what I mean? I think of that sort of thing. And that was never my world, like
yeah,
I never had that. Like when I was old enough to get into a club, I was going to like a dive bar down the street,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it was a different experience.
Um, okay, for track 6, I'm going to take you home, and I want a favourite song from an artist from your home county, please, Chris.
Well, okay. So Santa Barbara, where I grew up, there's a lot of music that's come out of that town over the years. Lots and lots of music. But I think the most famous band to ever come out of Santa Barbara. Well, I don't know. I'm probably going to get harangued for this, but I would think it would be Toad the Wet Sprocket. I mean, they were a really big band there for a time, and I remember like my band in high school was a very different kind of thing, but we played some gigs with them, and I knew Glenn and a couple of those guys a little bit, and I remember before they had their record deal, they self-produced their first record. And I was working at this coffee shop downtown when I was about 17. I remember Glenn coming in and he was selling cassette tapes of their record, like out of his backpack. And I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'll buy one of those. And there was a song on that record that's my favorite Toad the Wet Sprocket song. It's called Know Me. And yeah, so I got to go with Toad.
Nice, that's a great tune. I'd never heard that until like I got your list over, and it's the
Oh,
first time I
really?
heard it. Yeah, it's great, man.
Great tune. I remember, it's funny because I remember before they had recorded that, I remember asking Glenn like about that song, and he told me that he just made the lyrics up on the spot differently every time they played it.
Really?
So I don't know how he finally whittled it down to what he put on the record, but yeah, that was I was like, really? How the fuck do you pull that off, man? That's a good tune.
All right, last track, Chris. This is when you can play DJ and turn someone onto something new. It's a
Yeah.
song that many may not know that you would like them to hear, please.
Well, there is an artist. Who's actually been around for a while, but he had a big long gap between records. And this guy, Waylon Payne, and I just interviewed him a few days ago for my own podcast. But he's got a new album, pretty new album out now. So this song, "Sins of the Father," is off that record, and it's a really good record. It's one of those records that sounds. I mean, he recorded at the old Monument Studios in Nashville. It's called Southern Ground now, where like Christofferson and Waylon's mom, Sammy Smith, recorded all those records, and it just sounds like that. It sounds like it sounds new and fresh and everything, but it also sounds like it could have been recorded in 1970 or something. And so, it's just one of those records that kind of sits in those two places.
Yeah.
Amazing voice, great songwriter, and writes like really personal songs kind of about, well, you'll listen to it, you'll figure it out. Sins of the Father.
Okay, well, we put together a Spotify playlist, Chris, to accompany this podcast, so people can go and listen to all your song choices and the records that we spoke about today. As we sort of find ourselves, rolling into 2021, with vaccinations being rolled out and levels of infections dropping and being positive here, like what are you looking forward to for the remainder of this year personally, and what's happening professionally?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I'd look forward to getting the vaccine when it becomes available. And professionally, and I really hope that we can get on the road. I think there's a lot of people still thinking it might be summer. There's other people who are thinking it's more like fall. My gut, I mean, what do I know? I'm no expert, and there's a lot of factors involved in that whole thing. But I think that you'll see us on the road at some point this year.
Oh,
That's my guess. I hope. We all hope.
And how good is that going to be? How good is it going to be after this amount of time, just to have, like, whatever yous are giving out, they're going to give back just as much. We're all starved of it. Do you know what I mean? Live music, being whether you're playing it or just listening. I just think these first gigs back are just, for any artist, are just going to be fucking incredible.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's going to be nuts. I think people are so beyond ready for it that it's going to be wild, I'm sure, even if it's socially distanced and reduced capacities and all that sort of thing. I think it'll be people will be ready to let loose.
Excellent. Well, I guess everybody knows where to find out about what the Foo Fighters are up to. I think I don't need to be shouting about the website for them. Just quickly tell us about the podcast.
Yeah, so I have a podcast called Walking the Floor. I've done it since I think about 2013, and mostly interview like Americana and country music artists. But it's not only that, but it's a lot of that. And it's available everywhere, like Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Check it out. I try to do it consistently. Sometimes my schedule prevents me from doing that, especially when things have been so busy lately. So it's been a little tough, but yeah.
Wonderful. Chris, thanks so much for your time today, man. I know that you must be a very busy man, so I really appreciate being able to have a chat with you about records, man. And
absolutely, man. Thank you, man. It's so nice to thank you. It's nice to talk to somebody. You do so many interviews around record release that are all kind of the same interview. So I always appreciate when somebody puts a little something else into it.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks loads, man. Take it easy, Chris.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks, buddy. Bye-bye.